In this short video, I'm going to show you how to configure your exe6 IDE so that you can run, deploy, and debug your apps using your PC and an Android device. So when you install RAD Studio exe6, there's an option in the install to install the Android SDK, or you can use an Android SDK that you already have installed. To look and see if you've got your Android SDK installed, you can say Tools, Options, go to the SDK Manager, and see if Android SDK is one of the SDK versions you have. If it is, then you can select it and you'll see settings for the SDK path for the Java SDK, the paths to the NDK tools, and also where Java is on your system. Also, in the program group for RAD Studio exe6, you'll see that there's two shortcuts as part of the install to the Android SDK for both the Android tools and for setting up a virtual device. So Android tools will bring up the Android SDK manager, and so you can see which SDKs are installed. Here I've got the Rev 22.3, and it tells you if there's any updates, and you can use the SDK manager to install additional packages. The other shortcut brings up the Android AVD or Virtual Device Manager, and in here you can create Android virtual devices. You can also see what device definitions are already part of the install of the Android SDK. So once we have the SDK installed, we can test to make sure it's all working by saying File New, FireMonkey Mobile Application Delphi, bring up a blank application, go under the target platform and see if we've got the SDK. We do. See what devices are already attached. Here I've got my Nexus 7 tablet, my Samsung Galaxy S4, and my Google Glass devices are all found. So let's just go and create a simple test program to make sure the configuration is okay with my Samsung Galaxy S4. I can use the designer and say Galaxy S4 to get its form factor, put a button down, and just change its text property to click me. And double click on it and say set the button text property equal to 42. And while we're at it, we'll also add to the project group a C++ project. So we'll add a new project, C++ FireMonkey Mobile. I just choose the blank application. We'll put a button down and we'll go and change its text property to click me and double click and bring up the event handler for the button, text property, set it equal to 42. So to test the configuration, we'll just hit run on our first project, choosing my Samsung Galaxy S4 smartphone. So the APK file is generated. It's now going to install it on my Galaxy S4. And we'll click on the button, and it changes to 42. Okay, we'll switch to the C++ project. Make sure that configuration is working okay. So we'll click run. And here's the C++ version running on my smartphone. We'll click on the button and the button's text property gets changed to 42. So that's how easy it is if you use the standard install and choose all the options to install Android SDKs and so on. So if during install time you said don't install the Android SDK because you already have it installed somewhere else, you can go under Tools, Options, SDK Manager, and notice now there's no Android SDK. So we'll click the Add button, choose a platform, in this case Android, and we can choose the SDK. Since there's none to choose from, we can say Add New. We need to navigate to the Android SDK path. In my case, that's on my PC, Users, Public Documents, Embarcadero, Studio 14, Platform SDKs. So I need to find the base path, which is the ADT bundle for Windows SDK. And then I also need to tell the ID where the Android native SDK is, its base path. So we go here again under Users, Public Documents, Embarcadero, Studio 14.0, Platform SDKs. Here's the Android NDK, and then the ID already knows by an environment variable where to find your Java JDK that you're using. So we click this, it goes and finds, given all those base paths, all the different tools that it needs, and when we're done with that, we'll click Finish, And now we have the Android SDK set up as one of our SDKs that we can choose. Now the other part is creating a virtual device for Android. You may not have every kind of Android device. Go into your program group, and under Android SDK there's the Android AVD Manager, and here I can create a new AVD, give it a name. This is my Android AVD, and you can choose from some predefined templates. So Nexus 7, for example, Target, API. Make sure that you turn on Use Host GPU. Notice this message on Windows: emulating RAM greater than 768 megabytes may fail depending on system load. So let's set it to 768 here, and then say OK. And it created everything that I need. And now I have an Android AVD. So let's save that. And after you've set up the Android emulator, you can test your applications on any AVD that you create. You'll want to make sure and start the emulator first, because it takes a while for it to get started. The other thing that you want to make sure is in the Android SDK Manager that you have the latest SDK tools, SDK build tools, and also the Android 4.4.2 API 19. I've updated to the SDK platform 19.3, and I've got build tools 19.0.3. That allows me to have the latest versions from Google. I can select the Android emulator, hit the Run button. The ID will start up Project One, which is my Delphi version of the One Button app in the emulator. And now I can go in and click the button, and there's the event handler, and the text property of the button changes to 42. I can go back and choose the C++ version of the One Button app, again with the emulator, and hit the Run button. And then over in the emulator, the Project 4 icon appears, and it'll start. And there's the C++ Android version of the app running inside of the emulator. So that's how easy it is to configure and set up not only the IDE for doing Android development for Delphi and C++, but also setting up the emulator for devices you don't have. Again, we always tell everyone that they should test on the devices themselves, because that's where you can test all the hardware sensors and everything else. But if you need to test on a form factor you don't have, then the emulator is always there. Have fun building Android applications with RAD Studio XE6, Delphi, and C++.